We are live from Paris here on France 24. I'm Nadia Massi and here are the headlines for you at 11 p.m. Donald Trump announces $8 billion for the Mexico border wall as he declares a national emergency. Democrats call the move a gross abuse of power and vow to fight the president in Congress and in the courts. India promising a crushing response after 44 policemen are killed in Kashmir. Narendra Modi blaming Pakistan for providing cover to militant groups. And another snap election for Spain. Pedro Sanchez announces the third vote in 4 years after his budget fails to get through Parliament. Good evening. After weeks of threats, President Trump has now declared a national emergency to build a wall on the Mexico border. The US president says $8 billion can now be redirected to funding his signature campaign promise. Democrats immediately vowed to challenge what they say is a gross abuse of powers by the presidency. Now, Trump says he was forced to wield that emergency power after after a congressional budget bill designed to avoid another government shutdown did not include sufficient funding for the wall. Catherine Clifford has the story.
The latest move in his quest to fulfill his campaign promise and build the wall. The US president confirmed he'll bypass Congress and redirect federal funds to pay for it.
We're going to be signing today and registering national emergency. It's a great thing to do because we have an invasion of drugs, invasion of gangs, invasion of people, and it's unacceptable.
The Democrats have accused the president of abusing his authority. In a rare joint statement, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called it an unlawful declaration over a crisis that doesn't exist. They have promised to challenge Trump's move and have two ways in which to do this. The House and the Senate can take up what's called a joint resolution of termination to end the emergency status if they believe the president's acting irresponsibly or the threat is no longer relevant. But this can be vetoed by the president if not passed by a supermajority. The other path is through the courts, in what's likely to be a lengthy battle that Trump predicted would end up at the Supreme Court.
I think what will happen is, sadly, we'll be sued, and sadly, it'll go through a process, and happily, we'll win.
Trump made the announcement after agreeing to a spending measure that will keep federal agencies open through until September, following fears of a second government shutdown. But the measure fell short of the $5.7 billion Trump has been demanding for the wall. The president says the emergency would allow him to get his hands on almost $8 billion, with the money expected to be redirected from funds planned for military construction and counter-drug efforts.
To analyse that move by Donald Trump a bit earlier on, I spoke to Miranda Yava, a lecturer in political science at Tufts University. I started by asking her if Trump can now build the wall, given that he is likely to face significant legal challenges.
Yeah, it's likely that this is going to be challenged very rapidly. There are organizations that have already tweeted indications that they plan to challenge this. So under the National Emergencies Act, the Congress can override the president's emergency declaration. Of course, the challenge of going through Congress is that House and the Senate are controlled by different parties. So one of the things that will have to happen is to see if there are Republicans who are willing to put the rein to rein in the president's powers. Conservative Senator Mike Lee has already tweeted that he's concerned about Congress ceding too much authority to the president. There are some vulnerable Republicans, such as Susan Collins and Cory Gardner, who will be people to watch since they're up for re-election in 2020. The likelihood that this is mostly going to be challenged in, given that we have a divided Congress, is through the courts. And the most important Supreme Court decision to keep an eye on with this is the 1952 holding of Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company v. Sawyer, which really articulated a more limited view of the president's emergency powers.
What do you make of what it is that the president has actually done today? Do you agree with some of that language coming out from top Democrats saying this is a gross abuse of the powers of the presidency?
I agree with the Democrats on this. So the challenge with President Trump is a lot of inconsistencies in the language that he's used. He's tweeted out, boasting that illegal border crossings are down, talking about the progress at the border, which suggests that a border wall isn't necessary to achieve progress on immigration issues. He also said explicitly in today's statement, he said, I didn't need to do it, but this was faster. It was a faster way to do this through this emergency declaration, which suggests further that he knew that this wasn't actually an emergency condition, but it was more efficient, that he essentially just couldn't get what he wanted from Congress. And the reality is that being a bad negotiator with Congress isn't an emergency condition. And furthermore, it's also going to set a dangerous precedent of essentially allowing presidents to declare emergencies whenever they can't get what they want. The Republican Party will probably be unhappy with setting this precedent the next time that there's a Democrat in charge.
Next then, let's bring you the latest on those tensions between India and Pakistan, a day after a suicide attack in Kashmir killed 44 policemen. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has pointed the finger firmly at Pakistan and warned of, quote, a crushing response. Now, he accuses Pakistan of harbouring insurgent militants who are behind the attacks, a suggestion flatly rejected today by Islamabad. Well, let's take a listen then to a little of what Modi had to say.
I want to tell the terrorist groups and their masters that they have committed a very big mistake. They will have to pay a heavy price.
Well, protests broke out today in Kashmir, and demonstrators like Modi largely blame Pakistan for the attack, which comes just 3 months before India is due to go to the polls. Our correspondent Mandakini Galot reports from New Delhi.
The country's blood is boiling, the Prime Minister said in that speech that analysts here are saying was directed as much at Pakistan as at the Indian voter. As you said, the Prime Minister is seeking re-election in about a month. And in one campaign speech only 10 days ago in Kashmir, the Prime Minister vowed to break the backbone of terror in the region. And then this morning repeated that promise and said security forces have been given a free hand to decide the time, place, and nature of their response to yesterday's attack. So yes, the speech was very fiery, but as most of his national security speeches go, it revealed little about his government's plans. And all day the buzz in Delhi has been about whether the Prime Minister will limit India's response to diplomatic action, as we saw, for example, in the aftermath of the Mumbai 2008 terror attacks, or whether he will consider a military response. We'll just have to wait and watch.
Mandakini Galot for us a little earlier on the programme. Next, let's go to Haiti for you, where the president has spoken for the first time since protests broke out a week ago, demanding that he step down. Jovenel Moïse says he has no plans to resign and instead will introduce fresh economic measures designed to stop some of that anger in the streets. Naomi Lloyd reports.
After a week of political crisis and violent protests in Haiti, which have left at least 7 people dead, there'd been no word from the president. With the demonstrations against him showing no sign of ending, Jovenel Moïse finally broke his silence, announcing he would not be stepping down.
I have listened to the people. I know what you are being faced with. That's why I have brought in a series of measures. I've asked the Prime Minister to come and explain them and to adopt them quickly so that we can end people's misery immediately. I, Jovenel Moïse, head of state, I won't leave the country in the hands of armed gangs and drug traffickers.
The latest protests have been triggered by the country's inflation and skyrocketing prices, and a scandal over development loans made by Venezuela, where billions of dollars are unaccounted for. A court report last month suggested that President Moïse had been involved in irregularities. During his election campaign, he promised food on every plate and money in every pocket. As people in Haiti struggle to make ends meet and face inflation that has risen 15% since his election, demands for the president to step down are unlikely to go away.
Next, to a particularly grim statistic from the NGO Save the Children. Starvation, disease, and a lack of aid is killing 300 babies a day in war zones all over the world. Now, the charity says that almost 1 in 5 children are currently living in areas of conflict. Ivana Skatola has been taking a look at some of the key findings of their report.
More children are being affected by conflict than at any time over the past 2 decades. That's according to new analysis by Save the Children released Friday. The report reveals 420 million children are living near war zones. That's approximately 1 in 5 worldwide.
The direct consequences are what we've seen over the last 20 years, a tripling of the numbers of grave violations committed against children. That's attacks on their schools and hospitals, abduction, recruitment to armed groups. And then the indirect consequences are really what happens to these children's development if the conflict is allowed to occur over such a long period of time.
The report's main findings include 144 million children live in a high-intensity conflict zone. 100,000 babies died every year between 2013 and 2017 because of conflict. And by comparison, 175,000 fighters were killed in conflict in the same 5-year period. Based on data from 2017, Save the Children's analysis found that the countries where children were hit hardest by conflict were Afghanistan, Yemen, South Sudan, the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Syria, Iraq, Mali, Nigeria and Somalia. The report includes more than 20 recommendations for governments and influential organisations to protect children in war and conflict. They include setting a minimum age of 18 for military recruitment and tightening conditions for arms sales.
French prosecutors have opened an investigation into the Vatican's ambassador to France over a sexual assault claim. 74-year-old Luigi Ventura is accused of molesting a man in his 30s at Paris's town hall at the beginning of this year. Ventura has served as the Holy See's ambassador to France since 2009 and is protected by diplomatic immunity. Well, meanwhile, normal diplomatic ties between Paris and Rome have resumed today, more than a week after France recalled its ambassador. The envoy Christiane Masset returned to Rome several hours ago and was welcomed there by the Italian President Sergio Mattarella. Then, in an attempt to draw a line under weeks of friction, French officials have also announced that Mattarella will be coming to Paris soon. Tensions have spiked in the past couple of months, largely over migration, but France withdrew its ambassador after top Italian leaders met with members of the Yellow Vest movement here on French soil. Next, Spain is to go to the polls once again this April, the third election in the country in 4 years. The announcement by the Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez caps months of uncertainty for the Eurozone's fourth largest economy, as Ivana Skatola reports.
For the third time in less than 4 years, Spain is heading to the polls.
Between the two options, doing nothing and carrying on without a budget, or giving the Spanish people the chance to have their say, I choose the second. I propose to dissolve Parliament and call elections for April 28th.
The Prime Minister's decision comes after Parliament voted down the Socialist government's budget bill on Wednesday for the first time in 24 years. The defeat was the result of an increasingly fragmented political landscape. The Catalan nationalist parties chose to reject the bill and vote with Conservatives after talks with the government, designed to ease tensions, broke down last week over disagreements on the independence issue. The government's position has always been that, in line with the constitution, the country must remain united and no part of it can secede. Tensions were highlighted again on Tuesday when the trial began for 12 Catalan independence leaders accused of rebellion and sedition. The Prime Minister has been in office since June, when he won a no-confidence vote against Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy with the backing of regional parties, after he promised dialogue over Catalonia. He commanded a minority government and relied on the support of the smaller parties in Parliament. Although Sanchez's Socialist Party still leads current opinion polls, the Conservative People's Party and centre-right Ciudadanos are not far behind and could theoretically form a coalition with newly emerged far-right party, Vox.
It's just coming up at 11:15 here in Paris this evening. If you're just joining us, let's remind you of our headlines. Donald Trump announces $8 billion for the Mexico border wall as he declares a national emergency. Democrats call the move a gross abuse of power and vow to fight the president in Congress and in the courts. And India promises a crushing response after 44 policemen are killed in Kashmir. Narendra Modi blaming Pakistan for providing cover to militant groups.